Iain MacLeod, a seasoned electronics engineer for the Northern Lighthouse Board, was not a man easily moved. 30 years spent working in the extremes, from the misty Isle of Skye to the most desolate rocks of the Outer Hebrides, had turned him into a hardened pragmatist, bordering on the emotionless. He had witnessed storms that tore everything apart, ships swallowed by reefs, and, more horribly, the prolonged isolation that drove the strongest lightkeepers into muttering madness. For Iain, mental breakdown was an occupational hazard, and ghost stories were mere superstitious nonsense, a weak justification for terrible human failures or accidents. That is why he was the perfect person for his final mission – to automate the Eilean Mòr lighthouse, permanently ending the era of the Lightkeepers and dispelling all the wild legends. This small, black, exposed island, jutting out like a rotten tooth in the Atlantic, was notorious not only for its treacherous location, but also for the event of December 1900. 3 lightkeepers had vanished without a trace. Strangely, the door to the lighthouse was locked from the inside. Dinner was still half-eaten on the table as if they had just stood up. The lifeboat remained on its davits. No one ever found a hat, a shoe, or a fragment of a body. Locals whispered about souls claimed by the sea or some interior force that had taken them, but Iain believed in unusually strong currents and a terrible accident, not phantoms. As the supply vessel dropped Iain, along with tons of automation equipment, onto the slippery, moss-covered landing stage, the first storm of winter struck without warning. Waves battered the black basalt cliffs, creating a continuous, echoing roar like a mournful cry. The supply ship's horn gave a sad blast and then faded, leaving Iain submerged in a suffocating solitude. The soaring lighthouse, painted black and white, stood majestically, but inside it radiated a damp chill, not just the cold of the sea wind, but the chill of time, of absence. Stepping inside, Iain clearly smelled old grease, rusted brass, and decaying plaster. Strangely, he also detected a foul, fishy odor, slightly like chlorine or some unusual seaweed mingling in the frigid air. The first 3 days were purely physical, strenuous work. Iain installed the backup diesel generator, connected wind pressure sensors, and programmed the new LED controller. He worked relentlessly, enjoying the absolute silence, trying to suppress the initial uncomfortable sensations. Late on the 2nd day, while checking the old oil room in the basement, designed to hold fuel for the enormous Fresnel lens, he heard a very faint whisper, as if someone were speaking through a thick layer of water. He paused, listening. There was only the sound of wind whistling through the vent. He told himself it was simple sound resonance within the old stone structure. He continued his work, but a few minutes later he saw a heavy wrench lying on the stone floor, having fallen from the edge of the oil drum, though he swore he had placed it in the center. He picked it up, scoffing at his own absent-mindedness. By the 3rd day, climbing the spiral staircase between the 2nd and 3rd floors, he noticed a series of indistinct, wet footprints on the stone floor that he had previously wiped dry. These footprints appeared too high above the windowsill. He checked outside, finding the storm had eased slightly. He dismissed it, blaming the persistent dampness of the tower. His skepticism remained stronger than his fear. However, the occurrences began to defy rationalization on the 4th night. The storm had reached its peak, howling like an enraged giant creature. Rain poured down, and Iain was in the third-floor bedroom, checking detailed circuit diagrams by the dim light of an old kerosene lamp. He kept it, partly out of romanticism, partly to save power. Clank, clank, clank. The sound was distinct, heavy, coming from the spiral iron staircase. It was the sound of heavy seaman's boots, not metal rattling from the wind, but the determined footsteps of someone ascending the stairs. One slow, difficult step at a time, as if carrying something very heavy. The sound was uneven, sometimes stopping abruptly, then continuing, making the entire stone tower resonate like a hollow drum. Iain froze. There could not be a second person here. The supply ship was gone. He had checked every corner of this island. He gripped the oil lamp and slowly opened the door. The hallway was pitch black. He shone the light, seeing only the damp stone walls. The footsteps stopped, not on the landing, but right on the top floor, just outside the closed and sealed lantern room door. "Who's there?" Iain called, his voice hoarse, trying to maintain some authority. There was no reply, only the wind howling through the cracks. But clearly, a blast of that frigid, foul-smelling air was pouring down. He retreated to his room, trying to force himself to believe it was a hallucination. But then he saw it. A decaying, stained leather journal lying on his desk, right beneath the circuit diagram. He was certain it hadn't been there before. It belonged to Thomas Marshall, the vanished principal lightkeeper. The journal was written in increasingly shaky handwriting. December 11. John has gone mad. He says he sees a blue light in the waves. We have prayed in the sitting room, but the solitude is eating away at us. We have locked the cellar door to trap something down there, something from the ocean. December 12. The light went out again. Not the wit or the oil. Something covered it. I hear desperate breathing outside the window. It repeats my name in Old Gaelic. December 13. I beg for help. They do not answer. The shadow has entered. It is not a man, not a sailor. It is in the tower, moving between floors. It knows how many days we have left. The final page, dated December 14, was a large ink smear of hurried, almost illegible writing. We tried. We fought. Donald's arm. It took it. The light must stay on. Ian's heart hammered as if to break apart. He stared at the journal. Just then, the emergency radio system automatically turned on. Not his modern radio, but an old set he hadn't even plugged in. There was only prolonged static, like scraping metal. Then a shrill, distorted voice. "MacLeod, Iain MacLeod, Fami Agyarid A. I want it." The voice was inhuman, a combination of rushing water, grinding stone, and a sharp sound like breaking glass. It called his name, then repeated the old Gaelic phrase, a long-ago curse. Iain lunged for his new equipment. As he touched the control panel, the oil lamp in his hand suddenly went out, as if suffocated by an invisible hand. He was plunged into complete darkness. And then he heard a new, more terrifying sound. Not footsteps, but the dragging of something heavy on the stone floor. The sound came from the lantern room, moving in a circular pattern, steadily, as if something was being circled for observation. Iain,
now driven by a primal panic that transcended all reason, flipped open his lighter and ran up the stairs. He had to face the thing that had taken the three men. He burst into the lantern room. A bone-chilling sea wind rushed in through a broken window frame he swore he had sealed shut. The enormous Fresnel lens, an optical masterpiece that had been inactive for years and had all its wicks removed, stood silently in the center.
However, it was not entirely silent. Hanging on the old lightkeeper's coat hooks were not 3, but 4 raincoats. 3 black leather coats, saturated and torn, decayed by time, but wet as if just pulled from the ocean floor. The 4th coat, light gray, was Aine's own new raincoat, which he had left downstairs. Now it, too, was drenched with seawater, hanging beside the 3 black coats, as if a place had been prepared for him. Aine backed away, his body trembling with cold and fear. At that very moment, the old Fresnel lens, with no power source, suddenly flared to life. It was not the warm yellow light of kerosene, but a cold, pale, unnatural white beam shining directly onto Aine's face. In that beam, he saw 3 figures. They stood side by side, tall shapes, their faces obscured, but their forms were made of the absence of light, like black holes against the white background. They resembled the blurred images of the 3 men wearing those raincoats. One of the shadows raised its arm. It was a slow, reaching gesture. The black raincoat on the left, Aine saw clearly, was missing its right sleeve. The shadow was pointing straight at him. Aine screamed, his cry swallowed by the sea wind and the sound of the waves. The 3 lightkeepers had not vanished due to an accident. They had been attacked, killed, dragged away, and their spirits trapped to hold the position for something. And now, the very shadow that killed them was demanding a new lightkeeper. He bolted out of the lantern room, scrambling down the steps, slipping on the spiral staircase. He unlocked the bottom door and ran outside, sprinting madly toward the landing stage. He no longer thought of the radio or the automation equipment. He had only one goal: escape that pale white light. Iain found the small lifeboat and used all his strength to push it into the sea, despite the screaming storm. His hands burned from the ropes, and he rowed frantically, never looking back. He could feel the cold white light of the Fresnel lens rotating on his back, illuminating him like inescapable prey. The next morning, a fishing trawler rescued Iain, who was adrift and severely hypothermic. They found him in a state of severe shock, muttering incoherently. Investigators who later visited Eilean Mòr found no journal, no signs of a struggle, and the automation system was uninstalled. Iain was brought back to the mainland. He never spoke of what happened, but he lived in seclusion, frantically painting pictures of the lighthouse with the cold white light. He always insisted that light should never have been put out. It is the only thing that keeps us safe from the darkness. That statement became the island's curse. The Eilean Mòr lighthouse was never automated. It still stands there, a silent stone tower, shrouded in perpetual darkness. And it is said that on nights of great storms, if you are brave enough to look out to sea, you will see a cold white beam of light rotating in the lantern room, a light with no power source, no keeper, only the trapped souls forever performing their duty to guard the lighthouse from the shadow that claimed them.